Hey everyone, so this is the last episode of 11/22/63. It's called The Day in Question. And basically, the episode starts off on November 22nd, uh, where Jake and Sadie have stolen the car and hotwired it. And Jake is driving as fast as he can down to downtown Dallas. So they go to a street that is supposed to be clear, but it's not. Um, which basically just means, if you've been paying attention, that the passage is basically pushing back and trying to make sure that they um, don't get there in time. Um, So they get out and start walking because of it. Sadie asks how he knows Oswald will be in the book depository. Jake's like, well, some guy named Bonnie Ray who sees him, um, because this guy Bonnie Ray works there as well, and so he sees Oswald. Bonnie Ray sees Oswald walk into the book depository with the rifle under his arm. Um, Oswald is then set up on the sixth floor. At 12:30, Oswald takes the first shot, but misses, and the next two shots after that don't miss. Is what Jake is explaining. And as they make their way there, Jake thinks he sees Frank, Harry's father, but it's not true because he killed if you watched episode 2, you know that Jake killed Frank in that episode, which was titled "The Kill Floor." Just in case you don't remember what the title's name was. Um, and because of that, he loses sight of Sadie. Sadie is off somewhere else, a little ways, and she thinks she sees Johnny, even though clearly he's dead too. And then eventually, Jake finds Sadie. Then they cut through an alley and go through a parking lot. And go through a parking lot. The car then kind of someone who's driving behind the wheel, makes it so that the car is chasing after them, I guess you could say. And so while that's going on, you see there's this group of people coming out of a bus. I guess you could say it's a bus. I mean, it's not really much of a bus because it's not a standard bus, I guess. But anyway, it looks like it's kind of like a van or bus big enough to hold like more than 5 people. And so they're coming off of the bus, that little car, bus, van, whatever you want to call it. And so Jake and Sadie jump onto that little thing that everyone just came off of, and the car plows into the side of the car, or the vehicle, I should say. Um, and so they kind of are disoriented for a little bit, and so but before they get off the vehicle, and they finally make it to Dealey Plaza. Um, and they stop Bonnie Ray from closing the depository. Or they don't really stop him just yet. Because he's already locked the door. It's just that they just get there before Bonnie Ray can leave, and so Jake then pulls a gun out on Bonnie Ray, and then it goes to the opening credits. But I have a question. It's basically the same question except kind of paraphrased differently in like 2 different ways. But okay, so my whole thing is that if they woke up at 8:30 in the morning, because that is in the last episode, they show it the producers and writers and everyone who was working on the show wrote on the screen that Jake and Sadie woke up at 8:30 in the morning in the previous episode, at the end of the previous episode. So if they woke up at that point, why did it take nearly 3 hours to get to Dealey Plaza? Because I mean, with all the stuff, with all the past, all the events that they showed where the past was pushing back, it didn't take more than 10 minutes. It did not take more than 10 minutes for them to get through the whole pass pushing back thing. So why did it take them that long just to get to Dealey Plaza? Because I'm assuming that Jake drove no more than 5 miles away. Because if he's more than 5 miles away, then clearly it's gonna take longer to get to back to Dealey Plaza. So that doesn't make any sense why he would go more than 5 miles away. Because even he said in the previous episode when they parked their car that they had to stay as close to Dealey Plaza as possible, because otherwise the pass will just push way too hard onto them, push back way too hard on them, and then they wouldn't be able to make it back to Dealey Plaza. So I'm assuming, I think it's safe to assume that he did not park farther away than 5 miles. So, what I don't understand is with that, I don't know why it took them that long to get to where they had to eventually get out of the car, because where they got out, because they were forced to get out of the car, as you just saw, at a certain street that they thought was going to be clear, so they had to get out of that car, or had to get out of the car that they stole and walk on foot, or run/walk on foot. So I'm assuming that was I'm assuming that they were maybe like 2, maybe 3 miles away, tops. So I'm assuming where they got off, where they got out of the car at, was no more than a mile away. No more than a mile away. Because I just figured that it was no more than a mile away. So I think it's safe to assume that they were no more than a mile away. So where they got off at, first I want to say that it shouldn't have taken them that long to find an unlocked car. So maybe 30 minutes at most. 30 minutes to find an unlocked car, and then hotwire it. So that's 1/2 hour at most. If they took at most 1/2 hour to find that fucking car, that's 1/2 hour. So that brings them to 9 a.m. at the moment. It takes them to 9 a.m. And then if they're no more than 5 miles away, then it shouldn't have taken more than half an hour at most to get to where they had to get out of the car. No more than half an hour, so that brings them to 9:30. And then it shouldn't have taken them more than another half hour to get on foot from where they had to get out of the car to the book depository. So that's another half hour. So that brings them to 10 o'clock. Because they started out at waking up at 8. So assuming that they took no longer than half an hour to find the car and hotwire it and get in the car, that brings them to 9 o'clock. And no more. So and it didn't take them more than half an hour to get to where they were and the factory to where they got out of the car. So that's another half hour. So that's 9:30. And then no more than another half hour from where they had to get out of the car to the book depository, which is another half hour. So that's 10 o'clock. So like I said, so my issue is like, even given that they had taken no more than half an hour for each thing, for each part that they were shown, each part that was shown, that from where they had to find the car, get in it, and hotwire it, to driving to where they had trying to get to Dealey Plaza, but then had to get out to where they had to walk, and then from where they got out of the car to actually the book depository, it shouldn't have taken more than an hour and a half. So it shouldn't have taken So by the time they got to the book depository, it should have been 10 o'clock at the late at the late at the earliest. It should have been 10 o'clock at the earliest. So that gives them 2.5 hours to get up to the fucking sixth floor of the book depositories. 2.5 hours. Excuse me. And even if it took about 10 or 15 minutes to convince Bonnie Ray to open up the door again, to unlock the door, they still had over 2 hours to get up to the top of the book depository. That they still had over 2 hours. And even if there was like an extra 10 or 15 minutes somewhere previously, it should not have taken nearly 2.5 hours to get all the way up to the sixth floor of the book depository. It should not have taken that long. So I'm just like, it makes no sense. Logically and time wise, it should not have taken that long. I mean, even with the past pushing back on them, it should not have taken that long. So it makes no sense to me, like logically, even with the past pushing back, why it would have taken that long, why it would have taken 3 hours or 4 hours to get from where they were, which most likely is not anywhere, is not any no more is no more than 5 miles away. I mean, so it really should not have taken more than 4 hours to get over there, because they were not more than 5 miles away. So it should not so I mean, 4 hours is a pretty big buffer to get, I mean, even with the patch pushing back, I don't know. To me, it doesn't make much sense. Anyway, so it comes back from the opening credits, and it shows Oswald saying to himself, "They will know your name." Then it goes to Jake forcing Bonnie Ray to unlock the door, and they run up the stairs as JFK's motorcade makes its way around the corner. As they run up the stairs, they see a message spray painted on the side of the wall that says, "You're the patsy." You might want to, remember this for later in the episode. And so they're still running up the stairs, and on the side of because apparently there's two sides on the book depository of how you can get up to how you can get up the stairs. One side, the side that they're on doesn't go all the way up to the sixth floor, so they had to go to the other side of the book depository to go up to the sixth floor. So that's what they do, and then as they do that, Oswald just points his rifle out the open window, and as they get to the sixth floor, they're having trouble opening the said door, but they eventually are able to open it up, just as Oswald takes the first shot that misses. Jake then calls Oswald's name, which makes Oswald turn towards Jake and Sadie and shoot at them. Basically, Oswald turns back to the window, but JFK's motorcade is too far away at this point to be able to successfully shoot at him. So then Oswald starts looking for the pair, and Jake leaves Sadie by the windows, so that he can, reason with Oswald. Jake has his gun out at this point, but Oswald shoots at Jake, which then effectively knocks the gun out of Jake's hand. And then Jake still tries to reason with Oswald, but Oswald says neither Jake nor anyone else knows him, and all this BS and shit. Then Jake runs up to Lee. They have a scuffle, and Jake manages to get the rifle. And yes, I just said scuffles. He tries to get Lee to stop, but has to shoot him in the end, and Lee dies. Jake then calls out for Sadie, and he finds her where he left her, but a bullet in her stomach, either stomach or side or something like that. And he tries to go get help, but she's like, no, stay with me. I want you to stay with me and hold my hand. So he does. And then before she dies, Jake says that he's supposed to be with her, and that's why he came back. But then she dies, and when she does, the police storm in and handcuff him. It goes to commercial break, then it comes back, and Jake is taken into police custody. He is told that he will be going away for a long time, as the police officers are around him in the elevator, and he's walked through a heavy press crowd, told to take off his clothes, then has his mugshot, hand molds, and fingerprints taken before he's put into an interrogation room with Agent Hosty of the FBI and Captain Fritz of the Dallas Police. And then they question him about why he was in the book depository and why the dead girl, aka Sadie, was there. Jake says also told him that he was going to kill JFK, and that he lives lives underneath Oswald. Oswald was yelling about FBI. The FBI wasn't going to mess with him 2 days ago, 2 days prior. And Jake's like, Oswald came downstairs and said that he was going to show everyone show everyone that Lee was going to kill the president. And then when asked what Jake's response to that was, Jake says that he told Oswald that he's drunk. Jake explains that he didn't believe Oswald at first, but when he woke up the next morning, he couldn't get the whole thing out of his head. And then Captain Fritz is very skeptical of this and says that Oswald ordered the gun under the name Alec Hidell, and further says that that must be Jake's real name. Jake obviously denies this. And Fritz won't railroad him into some BS confession, but Fritz is like, son, this is Dallas, or this is Texas, or whatever. I can basically say I can get the confession out of you whether you want me to or not. And so Jake then asks Agent Hosty why he didn't stop Oswald, since it was Hosty's job. Hosty then has Fritz leave the room, and Hosty reveals that he knows Jake uses his last name Epping as well, not just Amberson. And then when Jake tries to repeat the same story, Hosty interrupts him and says Jake shouldn't be afraid to speak freely, just tell him the whole story. Hosty asks Jake who's Jake's handler and everything, and Jake denies having one, but Hosty doesn't believe it. And Hosty says, should I proceed to the part where you have no identity prior to 1960? But Jake responds with, should I proceed to the part where your superior comes in, tells you to burn that letter that Oswald wrote to you 2 days ago? And Jake asks what it said to change, that Oswald said that he was going to change the world. Hosty says the FBI gets crazy letters every single day, but Jake isn't buying it, thinks he's just covering his ass because Kennedy almost got killed for him failing to take Oswald seriously. Then Oswald says that, or Hosty says that's a nice theory, but Hosty offers one of his own where Jake, Sadie, and Oswald were Russian-sponsored assassins trying to kill JFK. And Jake says that it doesn't make sense since Oswald was killed with his own gun, but Hosty says he won't let a little thing like ballistics get in the way and all this stuff. And Jake threatens to spill the beans on the FBI tailing Kennedy if he's put on trial, and says one last time he didn't try to kill Kennedy. Hosty says he knows, but he doesn't care. Then Hosty's superior comes in, whispers to Hosty that he needs to burn the letter that he has he was given by Oswald. And Hosty is clearly surprised. Fritz comes back in and tells Hosty that Dallas is in his jurisdiction. Hosty says not anymore. Then the deputy comes in and says that there's a phone call for Jake, and Fritz says that he doesn't care who it is, even if it's the president of the United States. And it turns out it is the president of the United States. So Jake is brought out to speak to both the president and his wife, and then later Jake is let out of police custody. And asked by Hosty why Oswald wanted to kill Kennedy. Jake says that we will never know, basically. Hosty asks how Jake knew about the letter, but Jake doesn't answer. So Jake gets out, heads over to the bus station, and heads over to the bus station that Hosty's parked in front of, with an envelope of cash that was given to him by Hosty. He buys a ticket for Lisbon, Maine, and as he's waiting for the bus, he sees Sadie reading From Here to Eternity. She put the ghost Sadie. I say ghost Sadie because she's clearly dead. So the ghost Sadie puts the book down, and she smiles at him. He smiles at her. They're both smiling at each other. Before someone walks in front of her, and as when the person walks in front of her, she disappears. Then Jake makes it back to Lisbon, Maine, and walks back to where the diner is. Before Jake can go back to the rabbit hole, he tells himself, "I'll fix it, Sadie. I'll be right back." Then goes back into the rabbit hole. Once on the other side, everything is clearly grayer and duller, and the buildings all around him, including the diner, are all bombed out. And that's when it goes to commercial break. When it comes back, Jake makes his way away from the diner and asks a nearby woman what year it is and what happened to the diner. She says it's 2016, and she doesn't know anything about the diner at all before she leaves. So he then makes his way to a nearby house, kind of rubs the grime off of the window and looks inside and sees that it's abandoned, basically. Then he comes across 3 men trying to beat up another man. Jake picks up a rock. It hits one of the men that's basically accosting the 4th man, or holding the 4th man, so that the other 2 can beat up the one being restrained. When the 3 men run away, Jake realizes the man that they were trying to beat up is Harry. Is an adult Harry, who's a completely different personality. He doesn't seem to have any mental challenges. And so Harry tells Jake to follow him. And as they walk into an abandoned building, Jake asks if Harry lives there, and Harry says, "Yes, I live here and by myself." Harry asks where Jake came from. Jake tells him from Texas, and so Harry offers him, I guess, a very high alcohol content drink. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming. I don't know for sure, but they don't say anything. But Jake then sees a picture of Harry and his family and asks if that's his family. And Harry's like, "Well, you ought to know, Jake. Like, you ought to know." Well, he didn't say Jake's name, but he says, "You ought to know, dude. Like, you ought to know." I mean, Jake tries to play dumb, but Harry says that, "Well, you saved me and my family in 1960." So clearly he remembers Jake from that night. Harry knew he would see Jake again, but thought that Jake would be old by now. Jake asks when did everything change and if JFK was re-elected in 1964. Harry tells Jake that Kennedy was president 2 times before Wallace, which, I mean, this is, I guess, is a second inclination that the 2016 that Jake is in now is different than what he thought it would be. First was the whole buildings in Lisbon were bombed out, basically, and everything just basically looks duller and grayer. Now, that was the first inclination there. The second was, JFK was president twice before Wallace was president. I think George Wallace was not president ever in the United States. So that's the second inclination that everything changed. Then Jake asks if there was ever a Vietnam War. Harry says there wasn't. JFK's brother, or it's revealed also that JFK's brother was never killed in 1968. There was never the Twin Towers and the Pentagon were never hit by planes on September 11, 2001. Um, and so Jake asks if JFK did anything good while he was president, and Harry reveals JFK made Kennedy refugee camps that his mother, brother, and sister were put into in 1975. And that there were bombings. That's where people went to after the bombings. Harry says that they were called Kennedy camps because that's what Kennedy founded them after he was president. And after he was president, riots broke out, and bombs were dropped. And Jake is confused how things could have turned out so differently, which is not that surprising because, I mean, and I'm going to save that for later. I'm going to save that for after I finish recapping the whole episode. So it's kind of clear that Harry's no better off now than when he was back in the original 2016. And Harry's like, why did you save me and my family? Jake says that he just wanted to help Harry, and Jake decides to reset everything by walking back to the rabbit hole. And when he does walk back to the rabbit hole, he almost gets stopped by the people who are trying to beat up Harry. But he managed to get through without the others coming into the rabbit hole with him. And as he's lying there on the ground, he sees Sadie in the backseat of the pink car that Jake saw driving past in the first episode. Because when Jake goes back multiple times in the rabbit hole on the first episode, he sees this pink car driving by that passes by him. Excuse me. And so Sadie's in that car apparently, as it's driving by, and he sees that and he runs after the car. And he goes into the diner that she's currently sitting in with her cousins, and he tells her things that she told him when he went through the rabbit hole the first time. Like, she went to I think she said that she had gone to Princeton for school. She grew up in East Texas. That the people that are sitting opposite of her are cousins, and everything, and all that stuff. So eventually his attention is called to the yellow card man that is outside the diner door. And so Jake goes outside, talks to the yellow card man, and basically the yellow card man says the same thing that he said at the end of the previous episode, that him doing all this really isn't going to change anything. And he's like, every time I try to go back, I can't save her, meaning his daughter and everything. And then eventually the old card man leaves, and Sadie comes outside as her cousins are, getting back into the car. And she's like, do we know each other? She tries to get him to tell her how they know each other, and he's like, he doesn't say anything. He just decides to let her go, and not change the past or anything. So basically, as she gets in the car and is about to drive away, she says, "Oh, my name's Sadie." And when she drives away, he says to himself, "I know." Then Jake goes back to the rabbit hole and sits on the front steps of the diner before it goes to commercial break. Jake, after the commercial break comes back or ends, Jake is seen giving a test to his high school English class again. Excuse me. And he's looking very sad and depressed. When the class ends up leaving, Harry comes in and talks to Jake and tells Jake that he didn't get the promotion, and that Harry wants to thank Jake for putting in a good word for him, Jake breaks down and cries and says that he's sorry for not helping Harry as best he could. And at home, Jake smiles, or it's not smiles. Jake looks up Sadie on the internet and sees she's getting a state honor. Um, Jake then travels to Dallas to see Sadie get the honor of Woman of the Year. Um, After Sadie's speech, um, well, during Sadie's speech, she um, references Deke Simmons and how the older graduates of the Jody, um, or maybe he went to Jody, not yeah, he went to Jody, not to Dallas. Sorry, I don't know why I don't know why I put down Dallas, but anyway, so he traveled to Jody and as she's making her speech, she references Deke and how um, the older kids who graduated from Jody High School that they would remember Deke Simmons and how he had this poem, like copy stacks of this stacks of a copy of a poem that he loved. And so she recites the poem, and then everyone stands up and claps for her. And then after her speech, Jake goes up to her, asks for a dance, and so they dance with one another. And they get to talking. He introduces himself, and he says he teaches in Lisbon, Maine. And so she's asking like what brings him all the way to Jody, and he says, you're what brings me all the way over here. Um, and he asks if she's lived a happy life, and she says she does work that matters to her. She has a dog, and her life has had some challenges, but her life, yes, has been happy overall for the most part. She asks why he wants to know, and he says she seems like she deserves it. Then, for like 30 seconds to a minute or so, it shows just Jake and her dancing. A part of that little 30-second thing is shows Jake dancing with the younger looking Sadie, and then when it goes back to the older looking Sadie, she asks how she knows him, and he responds they knew each other in another life, which is basically a nice way to say the last 3 years that Jake has lived. And that's basically the episode. And it closes like the end of the episode closes on them, dancing together. And when I first watched this episode, I watched the ending. It felt very bittersweet to me because I love the ending because normally when there's when a show, movie, or book has a heavy romance element to it, I love that the protagonist has ends up with the person that they care about, that they come to fall in love with. And I tend to like that. I tend to want the protagonist to end up with the person they fell in love with at the end, especially when and this is for the majority of all the movies, books, and TV shows that have a strong romance element to it. But there are times where I don't mind where the protagonist doesn't end up with the person that they fell in love with. That's sometimes, it's not all the time, but 11/22/63 is one of those times where I don't mind where the protagonist Jake didn't end up with Sadie in the end. I don't mind that. I think I honestly love it actually, because there's no feasible personally I just don't think that it would have been feasible for Sadie for the 1960s Sadie to have successfully integrated into 2016, because because in 1960s it's very different. There wasn't any cell phones, or smartphones, or computers. I mean, there were computers, but I mean, they didn't have, like, only scientists pretty much used computers, um, or just mathematicians used computers, basically. There were no, like, plasma screen TVs, and basically politics was slightly different for them. I guess I don't know how different it was, but it was pretty different from in 1960s, than how it was in 2016. I mean, it's kind of the same, but it's still mostly kind of different. Um, so so yeah, it's like in every facet of everyday life in 1960s is different than it is in everyday life in politics in 2016. So it's just different. It's just so different. Um, so there's just no way that she could have been able to integrate into daily life in 2016 if Jake brought her straight from 1960s. Um, I mean, I doubt that he. I mean, I don't know how plausible it would have been for him to just, like, go back to 1960s, just and stay in the 1960s and have kids with her or whatever. I don't think that would have been that great of an that great of a thing for him. I don't know, because I mean, anyway. But yeah, so I think that it felt very nice that they didn't put him with a love interest in the end. And it felt very sweet and nice in that aspect. Very as far as the bittersweet part goes, the sweet part and bittersweet goes. But it felt kind of bitter. The bitter part of it was that the whole show was coming to an end. I felt like it was just very sad that it was coming to an end, and that basically it was just all coming to an end and everything. So it felt very bitter, just very bittersweet, and I couldn't have asked for a better ending personally. Um, and I liked how they had Jake reset time. Um, with that said, hit like if you like this episode, hit subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I will link my Patreon page late in the description box below.